This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.
Good afternoon, my name is Leonie Keisha. I am a reporter covering sustainability, and you're watching Politico Live, the live extension of Politico's unbiased journalism. I'm coming to you from the Residence Palace here in Brussels. The EU's existing Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive is being revamped. The goal is to make the new rules better at promoting reuse and recycling, increase recycled content, tackle excessive packaging, and reduce waste. The scale of the problem has been shown by several reports. One by Eurostat shows packaging waste was up by 23% since 2009, by 2.4% to 79.3 million tonnes between 2019 and 2018. Most of that garbage is paper and cardboard. Plastic accounts for about a fifth. But there are political and business interests at stake and a lot of money. So what might be the impact of mandatory recycled content targets? What role should deposit, return and reuse schemes play in incentivizing consumers' recycling and reuse habits? And will the revamp of EU rules really move the dial on sustainable packaging? We'll be discussing this and more with our panelists, but first things first, we have some housekeeping remarks. I would like to thank our partner FEFCO for making this event possible and thank our audience for joining us online. We would like to make this event as interactive as possible. You can participate by tweeting about it at Live Politico and ask questions through Slido using hashtag #RevampPPWD. You know who we are, so I will be prioritizing questions which are sent with a name and organization, so it's transparent for our viewers and panelists. You can already share your thoughts and answer the following poll presented by our partner FEFCO. How can packaging contribute to a more sustainable future? We will look at the results at the end of our panel. Before we get started, we'll now hear some opening remarks from our partner Eleni Despotou, Director General at FEFCO.
Good afternoon, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Leonie, for the kind introduction. In fact, I'm pleased to welcome you all on behalf of FEFCO, which is the European Association of Manufacturers of Corrugated Board Packaging. Have you ever imagined transporting your brand new smart TV at home or any other valuable good without any packaging? In fact, packaging serves a purpose. Its essential role is to protect goods, prevent damage, thus avoiding waste, including also food waste. We, of course, acknowledge the concerns listen around overpackaging, especially with the increase of e-commerce. However, we need to consider that both overpackaging and underpackaging can have harmful environmental impacts. And for this reason, at FEFCO, we promote the fit-for-purpose packaging. Our members produce tailor-made packaging to fulfill its functionality. We speak about sustainability. Sustainability is in our DNA because corrugated board packaging is circular by nature, renewable, compostable, and biodegradable. If found by chance in a marine environment, it decomposes in maximum 2 months. When we speak about recycling, paper and board packaging has the highest recycling rate amongst packaging materials, with 84.2% as EU average. Leonie referred to the generated or collected paper and board. We have assessed that in 2020, 56 million tons of paper and board were collected and recycled in Europe. So corrugated cardboard packaging is 100% recyclable and contains 89% of recycled content on average. Our members work on improving, optimizing, reducing the packaging waste through sustainable design. So the average weight of corrugated board has been decreased by average in Europe by 9% during the last 20 years, although in some cases, in some member states, you can observe rates up to 15%. So by recycling corrugated, the industry reuses the fiber and prolongs the life of its most valuable raw material. We have studies that demonstrated that corrugated board fibers can be used up to 25 times without losing their quality. So FEFCO and its members are taking very seriously the Green Deal and its implications. And for this reason, we have initiated and we are currently developing a climate neutrality roadmap elaborating on the way to decarbonize the industry by 2050. Also, in anticipation of the revision of the PPWD, FEFCO commissioned 3 studies conducted by independent consultants to evaluate the impact of corrugated board packaging compared to reusable plastic packaging, notably a peer review comparative life cycle assessment for corrugated boxes and reusable plastic, a hotspot analysis for e-commerce supply chain, and a white paper offering a critical view on reuse versus recycling. At FEFCO, we believe that both recyclable, single-use, and reusable packaging solutions have their place in the market. Reusable packaging is not the most sustainable solution in all cases, and there is no obvious best choice when selecting between recyclable and reusable packaging solutions, as results vary on a case-by-case basis. In addition, scaled-up reuse systems may cause environmental impacts that will be shifted but not disappear due to the complexity of the supply chain. By concluding, I would like to offer our science-based comments and contribution to the European Commission, and also to cooperate and provide any useful information that may be needed to support the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive revision process. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Eleni. And now it's time for our panel discussion. It's my pleasure this afternoon to welcome our 4 guests. Here today we have Saverio Maia, Chief Executive Officer at the Smurfit Kappa Group, one of the world's leading providers of paper-based packaging, MEP Maria Spiraki from the European People's Party, who is a member of the European Parliament's Envy Committee, Carsten Wachholz, a Senior Policy Manager at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, an environmental charity, and Mattia Pellegrini, Head of Unit for the From Waste to Resources Department at the European Commission's DG Environment. So, Mattia, can you bring us up to speed? I think we've heard recently that the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive will now potentially be a regulation instead. Can you walk us through the reasoning behind making this a regulation, and are we on track to have this review by July 20th?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. And indeed, we are in the middle of the revision of this directive, which is a very old directive. It's a directive of 1994, and which was limited. There was a limited revision which took place in 2018, where mainly only recycling targets were changed, but all the rest of the directive has remained unchanged. So, of course, packaging is an extremely important sector for the economy, and we would like to make it more circular. Why we are considering, of course, I mean, there would be political validation process, but indeed that at this stage of assessment, we are considering also the possibility to transform the instrument from a directive to a regulation, taking into account a number of elements, notably the fact that we have seen a proliferation of national measures in many areas, labeling, reuse. So this proliferation of national measures, which many of them have been notified to the Commission via the so-called TRIS notification, has led to a potential fragmentation of the internal market. So essentially, what we are considering is a regulation as a tool, because we would like to harmonize in a way that there will be the preservation of the internal market. Of course, you may be aware that there is the possibility for the Commission to use a regulation and also to use the internal market legal basis, like this was done actually not a long time ago, a couple of years ago, when we came out with a proposal for the batteries regulation, which was actually the transformation of a very old directive based on an environmental legal basis into a regulation based on an internal market legal basis. In the case of packaging, it will even be easier because the current legal basis of the existing directive is already an internal market legal basis. So it will be only a change of the legal instrument, but not of the legal basis. So that is where we are. Of course, we are doing our best to meet the target of adoption, which is the 20th of July, with the circular economy package number 2. Of course, the final adoption depends on a number of factors, and one of them, as you know, is also a positive opinion of the Regulatory Scrutiny Board. So we are really in the process of passing through the exam of the Regulatory Scrutiny Board. By coincidence, our Regulatory Scrutiny Board will be tomorrow, and then we will be waiting for the opinion of the Regulatory Scrutiny Board. So, of course, the opinion of the board would also have an impact on the timing. And indeed, if we are successful and we get a positive opinion, then we will be on track for adoption. If like it can happen, like has happened in the past in other cases, then in case of a negative opinion, we will have to see and reassess our scheduling and to see if we can still manage it or not. So that's, but this is, we don't know at this stage, so we will have to see what happens after we present and after we get the opinion of the Regulatory Scrutiny Board.
Yeah. And for the industry perspective, then we'll move now to Saverio. What do you make of what we just heard from Mattia on these rules now becoming a regulation? And then also when it comes to these new rules, what needs to be prioritized in your view when it comes to making packaging more sustainable?
Okay, well, as a start, good afternoon, first of all, to everybody. We cannot do anything different than be in favor of making a more circular system around Europe. We believe, as an industry in general, that, as it was said before by the Secretary General of the European Association, we believe that we can provide a lot of help and support to this because of the nature of our product. So we are already circular, and there were some figures. I would like to start from the good news, and the good news are that we are already there at a very high level. We are, as it was mentioned, at 84%. This is the latest Eurostat figures from 2018. Of recycling rate, which is huge and is the highest among all materials in the European community. Not to say that we cannot improve it, and I believe that between 2018 and today there have been already further improvements, but this is a very good starting point to go towards a circular economy. What are the key things that we need to take into account is, for example, also the effect on other part of the economy. When we talk about fit for purpose, we cannot avoid to highlight the fact that being a packaging fit for purpose, this also brings other benefits, such as of the food waste reduction and a lot of optimization that are possible in the system. So these are some key pillars to start with, which will allow our industry in general to improve. And we have plenty of room for improvement. So I'm very far from saying that we are perfect. We have plenty of room to improve. And I think all the system around Europe is working towards that through a huge amount of innovation, and which is a key part of this process. And I believe that we are ready to support and to show the circularity of our product. Just to close on this, I think that there is something I love and I really believe it in personally in a strong manner, is that it's not enough to bring and protect stuff from one point to another point, which is all we receive in our homes. What is important is that when we calculate that 89 or 90 or 85, it's already circular. What is for me very important to highlight is that is the end of life concept, which means that even if there is a leakage out of the system, this doesn't harm the planet, which is the most important thing. So even if it's not collected and it ends up in the planet, it doesn't harm it because it's completely biodegradable. So for me, this is the very positive starting point to develop together a legislation to improve the system.
Great, thank you very much. Can we move to Carsten? What do you make of what we've heard from both the Commission and from Saverio? And also what are your thoughts on the PPWD becoming a regulation?
Thank you, Leonie, and good afternoon to everyone. Yeah, I just want to remind the starting point when we went into discussion on the packaging waste directive revision. There was a headline ambition defined in the European Green Deal and then in the Circular Economy Action Plan of the European Union to ensure that all packaging on the EU market is reusable or recyclable in an economically viable way by 2030. And we need to ensure that the revision that is happening at the moment will meet this headline ambition. For us at the Foundation, there are three main objectives linked to that vision. First of all, I think there's a lot of agreement that we need to create harmonized rules for circular packaging solutions on the whole EU single market. And somehow the Commission has set a precedent with a recent proposal on the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products regulation under the SBI. And now it's more a question of political feasibility, also in discussions with the co-legislator, the Parliament and the Council, whether it's politically feasible to move from a directive towards a regulation for packaging as well, to increase harmonization across EU member states. Then I think in the introduction in the video, and also Leonie quoted it, there we still have an increase of the overall amount of packaging waste created in Europe. And that's why the objective must be to come to an absolute reduction of packaging waste created in Europe, either through direct elimination of packaging that is not necessary or problematic, or through the redesign of delivery models from single-use towards reusable packaging. And finally, we heard already that we are having a good starting point, at least for paper packaging on the recyclability, but for many more complex packaging and other materials, we are dealing mostly with plastic packaging in the Foundation. We need to strengthen the legal definition of what we mean by recyclability, and both in theory and in practice. So we would like to see mandatory criteria that already existing voluntary design guidelines need to adhere to. And then we need proper ways of verification that the packaging solutions put on the market are fulfilling these requirements. And then we need to look downstream because we have existing EPR systems and we need more evidence that those packaging designed using these guidelines are actually being collected, sorted and recycled in and across EU member states. I think I leave it there for the moment.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you. Maria, you've been following the latest circular economy measures quite closely for the EPP and the ENVI committee. What do you think of what we've heard so far, and what would you prioritise in this review?
Let me start by saying that I fully agree with the representative of the industry that we have huge room for improvement. And by saying this, I think that we have to use all the available instruments to make sustainable products at the norm. And by saying this, I include, of course, packaging. According to my opinion, one of the issues that we have to tackle immediately is the profitability of the activities of the recyclability of packaging. And by saying this, I think that the main path that we have to follow is to have a combination between deposit refund schemes and extended producer responsibility schemes. According to my opinion, the DRS schemes, deposit refund schemes, are facilitating waste collection, reduce littering, reduce material leakage, and encourage recycling. At the same time, we have to combine them with the EPR schemes, because it is important to make packaging and to make packaging much more recyclable, to reduce energy consumption, and to improve the business case for private investments. By giving a part of responsibility, by giving partial responsibility to product manufacturers, it is important to say that we are trying to incentivize them to invest further on the issue of packaging. And by saying this, when it comes to the legal framework, I think that we have to work on streamlining the criteria and on integrating the internal market, because it is important to say that now we have a lot of lack of implementation when it comes to different pieces of legislation, and now we have another one. It is the sustainable product regulation that it is on the pipeline, and I would like to announce that I am the rapporteur on behalf of FITRO committee on this report. So I think it is important to have an overview on the issue of sustainable products regulation, and taking into account that it is a key piece of legislation in order to improve the packaging and packaging waste directive also. It is also important to understand that we are not working in silos. We have to work all together, and we have to understand by the end of the day that we have to address the snowball effect of the new regulation and initiative in order to ensure that what is proposed will be implemented not only by the regions but also by the industry as well.
Great. Well, thanks very much for mentioning the Sustainable Products Initiative. I think there is some questions about how this will fit with the PPWDs you kind of touched upon. Can you expand on, Mattia, how the SPI and the PPWD will be fitting together as part of this policy puzzle?
Yeah, so thank you very much. And I've also been listening with carefully to all the previous speakers. One point I would like to make before I talk about SPI and the relationship with the packaging waste directive is that indeed we totally agree with the representative of the paper industry that for certain materials recycling rates are very high. This is the case for paper, but also is the case for glass and metals. But this does not solve what Carsten explained very well, which is the overall amount of waste which is generated from packaging. So there is a significant increase of the overall amount of packaging and packaging waste then as a result that is put on the market. So one thing is to make sure that it's recycled at the end, but the other thing is how we prevent this negative trend. So there where we are working a lot is the area of waste prevention and reuse, which were not tackled in the 2018 review. Also, I think indeed Carsten again made a very good point on design for recycling, and the fact that indeed the idea here is not only having high recycling rates, is to make sure that the product is designed in a way that is fully recyclable. So it's to really deliver on this commitment of the Green Deal that everything will be recyclable or reusable by 2030. And any type of packaging which is not recyclable and not reusable by 2030 cannot be placed anymore into the European market. I mean, just to give you an idea, based on certain statistics, we are talking about 30 to 35% of the current packaging, which is for various reasons is not recyclable. So it's really a significant proportion. Now, on the links with the SPI, the idea is that indeed the two tools will be complementary, because one is developing rules on the product, the other one is developing rules on the packaging which goes around the product. But there may be also area where there will be more clear interlinks. For example, there is the whole area of over-packaging, where we are assessing also how to regulate that area, because indeed evidence shows that more and more in certain area. So again, it has to be qualified, but at least in the e-commerce side, there is a lot of over-packaging. That means that the overall packaging is several times bigger than the product that contains. So there, we're also considering how to deal with that, both under the packaging directive, but also under the SPI regulation, because indeed there is no point in having a packaging which is 10 times bigger than the product that contains. This is some of the evidence which has been collected. I mean, of course, I mean, you need to have packaging for various reasons, but then you don't need to have this rush of 1 to 10 like we have seen sometimes in the e-commerce area. So that's I think there's a few points I wanted to make as a reaction to some of the previous speakers, but also replying to your question.
Thank you. Saverio, what do you make as the industry representative of what you've heard from Mattia and of the interplay between, or the potential interplay between the SPI and the PPWD?
I'm very happy of what Mr. Pellegrini said, because he said something correct about the overpackaging, and it's something which is there, but the reality is that as I said before, there is a lot to do. We are working every day in order to reduce the overpackaging. There are optimizations that are there possible and that we are implementing. There has been a weight reduction during the years, which will continue through an improvement of the performance of the paper. And for sure, we have seen, especially, I suppose, this has come to our eyes very evidently during the pandemic. The huge increase of the e-commerce is an area of overpackaging. So it's not about denying the evidence, it's about working and innovate and optimize the system. But once again, and just to be putting the things into perspective, packaging normally represents 3.5% of the carbon footprint of the final product which is shipped. But still, if we can reduce that part, this is going to help to go towards the European target, which we all want to achieve. The tools are there. The companies are working every single day with the major brand owners to help them in reaching their sustainability targets. And we are there to help and to work on that. And I think there is a lot of potential there, which we need to take. And there is some low-hanging fruit, which we can take much quicker. And there is something more structural in terms of innovation and investment, which has to be done. So I'm absolutely clear that there is overpackaging, and that's our duty to support and help. However, I think there is the nature of the products and the supply chain that are connected to it needs to be taken into account. We are convinced that our calculation as an industry is that we can replace with the sustainable solution around 20-25% already of the fossil-based packaging. So we just want to do it. Let's go for it. Let's start improving, and that's what we are all here for.
Carsten, what do you make of what we've heard from both Mattia and Saverio on both the SPI and the PPWD?
Yeah, just maybe a broader reflection. I feel that when we are talking about the Packaging Waste Directive, we're mostly talking about recycling of different packaging materials. And I think the last two statements have made it very clear. If we want to capture the full system, then we need to look at the products themselves, at the packaging around it, and the business or delivery models to best supply them to the customers. And obviously, the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products regulation will look for certain product categories on the product design, so including how the product could be redesigned to eliminate the need for packaging, or at least for problematic ways of packaging. The Packaging Waste Directive will look at the packaging part of it. But for instance, the food products segment is excluded from the SPI. So this is an important issue which we will look probably next year when the EU is discussing a potential legislation on food systems. So just to make the different pieces here, currently we are focusing on packaging waste. And we hope that we could expand a bit the understanding of what can be done beyond recycling of certain materials. And there are different instruments that, for instance, also Maria Spiraki referenced deposit return systems and EPR. But in terms of promoting the uptake of reuse models in in specific market segments, there are different instruments to do it. So one way could be to work towards aggregated packaging waste reduction targets at member state level that would provide an indirect incentive to promote reuse via national policies. That could look like, for instance, like France is now planning to set requirements for larger supermarkets to provide space for in-store food refill stations. It could go indeed for deposit return systems where it makes sense, or to define reuse quotas. And we feel that these instruments should focus in the first place on those market segments where reuse solutions are already widely available. So that applies in particular for business-to-business packaging and for the beverage sector. And the key thing is to work towards greater standardization to scale the reuse market segment. In our work at the Foundation, we have looked a bit more deeper what the different reuse solutions could look like. And we feel that policymakers, no offense here, very often only look at return systems. So where we put the burden on the consumer to bring used packaging back into the store. And we have expanded that in our upstream innovation guide to look at refill solutions in the shop, refill solutions at home, and return from home. So there's large room to encourage also more innovative circular economy business models.
So then staying on this topic of reuse, in the Commission's document laying out what it would be considering for this review, it floated the area of transport packaging as being a particular potential target for reuse measures. Going back to Carsten, you mentioned beverage and business-to-business models. Do you think transport packaging should be a particular target for these kinds of measures, like the Commission has said?
Yes, I would agree with that. I mean, we have provided input from what we learned from the engagement with the companies in our network, that this is a sector where you can more work towards larger scale solutions compared to end consumer products in the first place.
So Valeria, what are your thoughts on mandatory reuse, particularly for transport packaging? Is that something that you can see having a big impact on your business? Yeah, I'd really like to hear your thoughts on that.
To me, instinctively, it's difficult to see how you could have a mandatory target there, apart from the fact that legislation can do it. To me, reuse is one part of the solution. I have nothing against reuse. On the contrary, the whole point is to, when you set the target for reuse of packaging, you should evaluate the benefit or not from a life cycle perspective, because there are many elements which comes into play in the life cycle perspective, which is the return, the transport back, so depending on the distance of the product. And we have done lots of studies and analysis where the distance plays a key role here to be effective in terms of environmental impact. So yes to reuse when it makes sense from a life cycle perspective. One of the key things that we see on the market already, and it's for example for the transport or fruit and vegetable, and when you make the calculation seriously in independent manner, in a constructive manner, you see that there are only some logistic constraints that are going to change completely the result of what is best from an environmental part. So many times the one size for all can also be a negative, because you are losing a lot of space. There is return trips, there is sanitization to be done. So it is applicable, but it has to be studied and look after case by case. It will be good in some cases. It will be not good in many other cases. So that's how we should be looking at, from my perspective, even because below a certain number of rotations, what happens is that the standard packaging, the reusable packaging, is going to be discarded, and that's what I was saying before. That's not going to disappear from the planet, and that's the risk we have.
Mattia, can you kind of expand on what the Commission kind of floated in its document? It did point out transport packaging as being a potential target for reuse measures. What other packaging formats might be targeted by reuse, mandatory reuse measures?
Yeah, of course, at this stage, we're still finalizing our thinking, and I cannot disclose which are the sectors we have in mind. But indeed, I can explain the way we are proceeding. The way we are proceeding is a bit what Carsten said, that we are focusing on this area where we know that there is a potential for reuse, because indeed we are aware that not all the packaging sectors are equally, let's say, ready for a reuse target or reuse quota, as you have called it. So there is one of the criteria we have used, so a bit in line with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation suggestion. I also would like to say that, again, to respond to Saverio, that indeed we are considering also all the assumptions behind, because indeed let's say the positive environmental benefits of reuse are there only if a number of assumptions are met. And one of them, indeed, is technically is called the number of rotations. So that means how many times these reuse products or reuse cap, for example, is going to be used. Because indeed, only if you achieve a certain number of rotations, then you have positive environmental benefits. So there we have received plenty of studies from industry, from NGOs, from UNEP, the United Organization for the Environmental Program, and we have carried out our own study. And also, let me say, the last point, which is also very important, is again a point that Carsten mentioned, that whatever we do on reuse targets and reuse quotas has to be also combined with some standardization work, like Carsten mentioned. Because indeed, you need to harmonize sometimes the formats of a packaging. You need to harmonize the system of collections. So indeed, only if certain standardization takes place, then the reuse target can play the full role. Of course, we see also, and this we agree with what Saverio as a representative for industry was saying, that we see reuse as a complementary tool to single use. We're not saying that from the day after tomorrow there will be no longer single-use packaging, but what we have seen is a total decline of reuse. So there we need to do something in order to make sure that this business model survives, because we have some statistics showing that if you take the last 20 years, basically, even in countries which had a very high level of reuse, I'm quoting the example of Denmark, where I think reuse was above 80%, reuse went down, I think, to 13%, if I remember the statistics. And this has been, with the exception of Germany, has been the trend everywhere in Europe. So indeed, that's, I think, is also something which explains why this area is under consideration by the Commission, because, of course, the Commission only asks if there are economic and statistical data behind, and clearly on reuse and the decline of reuse, we have significant evidence that this is there has been over the last 20 years a significant decline.
Maria, we've heard now from Saverio, Carsten, and Mattia on reuse models. What are your thoughts from the EPP?
Allow me to say that it's not an EPP position, but it is a position based on my experience that, first of all, we have to make the circular activity profitable. And it is important to say that there is no solution fits for all. And in this regard, I think that we have to follow some kind of guidelines, some kind of basic rules in order to have an achievement, in order to have a conclusion that it is, first of all, circular. And the first issue you have to address is to reduce the pressure on using materials. The second is to reduce the energy consumption. And the third is to improve the business case for private investments. And by saying this, I think that we have to take into account that there are some types of packaging that they are not reusable. But according to my opinion, we have to set criteria, and we have to set minimum recycled content stored packaging, and this is the number one issue. The second one, number issue is that we have to extend the deposit refund schemes, and also in combination with extended producer responsibility schemes. And the third, but not least, is to streamline the criteria within all member states. It is important to create a new market when it comes to revamp packaging rules.
Great, thank you very much. Over the past couple of days, we've been receiving questions from participants, and I'll take this moment to remind people that you can use Slido to ask questions to our panelists using hashtag revamp PPWD. We've got a lot of questions here. Some of the most popular ones we've touched on already. The most popular one is, will the proposal for the revised PPWD be published on 20th July or later in the autumn? I think we touched on that earlier, Mattia, but is it likely that it will come later in the autumn, or are you sticking by your previous answer?
Yeah, I will remain with my previous answer that we're doing the best to comply with what is in the Commission work program, which will be 20th of July 2020, and then let's see how the internal process will go.
Of course. Thank you. We also already looked into mandatory reuse targets. One very popular question also is, will the Commission propose a negative list naming specific materials that will be restricted in packaging, such as carbon black or PVC? Mattia, I think this is another question for you. Is this something you can shed some light on?
Yeah, so first of all, I think what we are doing is to come up with a proposal on what is designed for recycling for the different sectors. So that is the priority number one. So how to achieve, as Carsten was saying, this headline announcement, which is a clear political commitment, which was taken that all packaging must be recyclable or reusable by 2030. So that's clearly the direction we're working. Then, if you may recall, both in the Green Deal and the Circular Economy Action Plan, there was also reference to complexity of materials in packaging, and the fact that sometimes the complexity of materials in packaging is what actually makes this packaging non-recyclable. So there, in theory, if you have a design for recycling process, automatically all the materials or composite packaging which is not recyclable by 2030 should no longer be in the market. Of course, we are also assessing whether for some of these, let's say, packaging, which are clearly not recyclable already at the moment, whether a similar approach could be considered. But I mean, that's is subject, as I said, to both economic scrutiny by the regulatory scrutiny board and also political validation. But I think the overall idea is indeed is to actually the removal of material complexity or the reduction of material complexity is a result of the fact that everything has to be recyclable by 2030.
This was a question for Mattia, but if any of the other three panelists we have with us have any strong views on this, it'd be great to hear from you. I don't know if Saverio, for example, you have a strong industry perspective.
Well, the industry perspective, well, we cannot, we will, as I said before, I think, I don't know what I could add on that is that we will continue to strive and support the directive and to make everything we have to reach the target in the timing. I mean, we have initiated the development of our climate neutrality roadmap. We believe we are in a good place, and we will continue to improve designs, and we will continue to support the entire supply chain with more sustainable solution.
Yeah, Carsten.
Allow me to say that
sorry.
It is important. Sorry for saying this, but it is important to understand that a key role will play the regulation concerning sustainable products, because we will finally set the eco-design requirements. We will create the EU digital passport, product passport, which will be applied to all products in the market. And we are trying to tackle the destruction of unsold consumer products. So it will be a great initiative, that it will have an horizontal impact, that it will, of course, affect the issue of packaging and other packaging as well.
Thank you. And Carsten?
I just wanted to say a blacklist is always easier to handle in voluntary initiatives. So as the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, together with UNEP, has set up the Global Commitment, which tackles plastic packaging and shares, works with many leading brands and retailers and others of the packaging value chain towards circularity for the sector. We have seen that there are packaging formats and items that are inherently difficult to recycle, or which would even hinder recycling or compostability of other items. So I think there is an increasing move from the industry to get rid of certain things. But from a regulatory point of view, I would like to stress the approach that Mattia has mentioned before. We need to get the design for recyclability criteria right, and then gather the data from what is actually being collected, sorted, and recycled in practice. And if we find that certain items simply don't, they match maybe in theory criteria, but they don't end up in the recycling stream, then we need to set a threshold and a timeline where they would be banned from the market. So that's not a straightaway blacklist, but it could be a regulatory approach going forward.
Great, thank you very much. We have one last question, and then I'll go back to the questions towards the end. How detailed will the essential requirements for recyclable packaging be? And then they indicate negative list, minimum standard, or something else entirely. I should pick someone to take this. I think this was intended for Mattia again, but we'll come to the other three to get your view on this.
Yeah, I think Carsten has explained very well what we have in mind. Indeed, as I said, as part of the policy option that you consider in an impact assessment, you can also include a negative list, which often is seen as an easy tool. But in reality, I think we are thinking also about a more complex system. Indeed, what we will set up design for recycling criteria. This design for recycling criteria, of course, they will have to be then declined for the different packaging sectors. By the way, in certain areas, there is already standardization work which is ongoing. So we have been mapping the entire packaging sector, and we are aware that in certain areas there is already some standards for design for recycling. Maybe they need to be updated or to be improved. In other areas, there is nothing, so there we will have to do something. And then once you have the standards, then you can really check in reality how these products they do perform against these standards. And indeed, of course, there should be a cutoff date by which if you don't manage to demonstrate in according to that standards for your given sector that you are fully recyclable, and then in line with the Green Deal, that product after 2030 should no longer be in the market. So that's is a complex system to be put in place, but it's a system which will ensure coherence. So that is a bit the thinking, and based on, indeed, as I said, on what is already written in the Green Deal and is put forward as a political commitment.
Great, thank you. Would any of the other three particularly like to comment on this? Or, yeah, Carsten, go for it.
Just to say that I saw also on the Slido website, there are a lot of people asking, will you use these guidelines, these criteria, or whatever? So that just to mirror that in certain segments and in the industry, we have existing guidelines. And as the foundation, for instance, we haven't developed our own guidelines. We are also referring to a few ones which we think make sense and mirror our understanding what promotes recyclability in theory and in practice. So I think there is a precedent in another policy area. I know it's a very complex issue as well, but in the case of biomass sustainability, it's also that the legislation only defines the criteria that different certification schemes need to meet, and then you can ensure that there are different schemes that match the legal requirements. I think that could be a middle ground instead of defining everything, every detail, technical detail in the legislation.
Absolutely. Oh, Maria, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, I fully agree with this because I think that the whole process is a dynamic process, and maybe with this kind of new regulation or directive, I prefer the regulation. I have already said it. We have to work on continuously improve the environmental performance of packaging. And also, I think one of the issues we need not touch yet is how can we facilitate the correction of functioning of EU in EU packaging in the internal market, and also to have a life cycle approach in order to tackle the issue of waste coming from packaging. In this regard, I think that we have to avoid the details and get through into the main priorities that we have to set up in order to have a progressive legislation, or in order to have something that it can work in different areas.
Thank you. Saverio, anything to add?
No, I think this is a very interesting debate, and I think we are all trying to reach the same objective for 2050. I think the roadmap for me, the way I try to summarize it in few seconds, because that nothing else we can do in this occasion, is for us, we need to eliminate and optimize all the unnecessary packaging that is put on the market. So optimize it and do the fit for purpose packaging in a way that just for the job it is intended for, which means transporting, protecting the product, and then disappearing from the planet. Then there is a step, which is the step about collecting, recovering, restoring. There are strategies like reuse, which have to be applied when it's possible and when it makes sense. And then, of course, remanufacture and recycle once again. And finally, being, for me, the step 3 is whatever resource we extract, we need to give it back to the planet and be completely circular. So that for me, in few seconds, which is a much more deep and intense theme, but that's what I can say in conclusion in few seconds.
Thank you. One of the very popular questions also was, will the PPWD adopt European's definition of recyclability? I don't have that definition to hand, so if Adeline Mayala, who sent in the question, would want to send in the definition, we could get to that question towards the end. One thing I wanted to touch on is I want to go back in time a little and reflect on the implementation of the Single-Use Plastics Directive, which can be seen as a precursor to the packaging rules we're discussing today. Various different stakeholders were left unsatisfied by the rules, and so I'm wondering what can be learnt from this in the review of the PPWD. Maria, I wonder what would be your thoughts on this?
I was involved, as you maybe know, in the Single-Use Plastic Directive as the rapporteur on behalf of EPP in the ITRO committee, and I think that it is a success story. I insist on this. I think it's a success story because we set rules on single-use plastic, aiming to prevent or reduce the impact of certain plastics. It is a catalogue of 10 single-use plastic products on the environment, and particularly on the marine environment and on human health. And now we can much more improve the existing legislation by trying to update the legislation, and also ensuring that we are leading the packaging sector into circular solutions, and also into solutions that they are fit for purpose, but at the end of the day they are fully reusable and recyclable by the end of the day. In this regard, I think that we have to focus on the issue of how can we increase the rate of recyclability by insisting on deposit refund scheme and also on a PR scheme, and at the same time taking into account that the industry is ready to adapt. As far as I can understand from today's debate, I think that the industry is ready to adapt. The industry is not looking for a solution which fits for all, but the industry is ready to adapt in terms of circularity and reducing waste until we have a zero waste economy.
Great, thank you. Saverio, would you agree with Maria's assessment? And what do you think can be learned from the SUPD from the industry perspective?
I think it's been a big step forward, and it's been a very positive step forward. At the end, what she said in a very polite manner, and I am, as an Italian, I am a little bit less political. I mean, at the end, I think the shock that the people is having when swimming or when showing some shocking image. I mean, I think this is a step to improve that. So for me, that is a positive experience, which has to be elaborated and improved, as Maria just said, in order to make it more stable and more embedded in our day-to-day life.
Great, thank you. Carsten, any thoughts, whether any mistakes you saw in the SUPD that you wouldn't want to see repeated in the PPWD, or in your view, the SUPD works pretty well?
I don't have an in-depth knowledge and opinion on that, but I would stress what Maria Spiraki said. It was a very important instrument to close a regulatory gap and to increase the awareness around plastic items that have a high likelihood of being littered or ending up in the natural environment. And yes, we covered quite different types of items in that specific piece of legislation. And I think the discussion today shows that if we're looking at a packaging item, we need to ensure that the rules are consistent and apply not only for that specific items, but basically for all packaging solutions put on the European market. And that includes the discussion, which we haven't had much time to look into today, around recycled content targets. So we set a precedent in the Single-Use Plastics Directive. I think it sent an important signal, but now we need to ensure that this will be reflected properly in the broader framework for the whole packaging sector.
Thank you for mentioning recycled content targets. I know that this is a hot topic. Going to Mattia, can you kind of give your reaction to these comments on the SUPD, and then also maybe expand a little on what the Commission's got up its sleeve for mandatory recycled content targets? I think there are also some questions on the Slido about this, and maybe any kind of indication about which sectors might be targeted there.
Yeah. So maybe starting with the Single-Use Plastic Directive, clearly was a predecessor of many of the legislation which are coming now, because it was the first time which you had a real product legislation under the previous commission, and it also was an essential tool in order to fight a specific problem, because I think it's also important to recall that while on packaging we are trying to cover all the packaging materials, and we're also focusing on a number of issues, not only on marine littering. Actually, marine littering is not a major issue we are considering under the packaging. The SUP was essential to bring this issue of partially solve this problem of marine littering, which is linked to plastic pollution. So that's and also then linked to that, and is indeed anticipating your question. We see that indeed it has been a predecessor also in the type of tools, because indeed some of the things we are considering now, such as consumption reduction targets, or for example recycled content measures, this is something which we are now considering under the packaging legislation. So indeed, and we're learning also from what we have learned in the implementation of the SUP directive. So indeed, also in the type of regulatory tools that were chosen, it was a way to test some of them. On the specific question on recycled content, what we have assessed in our impact assessment is in particular whether, I mean, essentially, recycled content is only needed if two conditions are met: low recycling rates and downcycling. So that means that often the downcycling is a technical word which is often used in the sector, but essentially means that this recyclates is used to lower type of application. So if you have, so what we have seen, we have tried to see for all the different materials, which is metals, glass, paper, and plastics, where really these two conditions are met, and then for that sector where these two conditions are met, which I think is quite obvious, because you just need to take the statistics available, and you will see that for a number of packaging materials, there is already high recycling rates and there is no downcycling. Then where these two conditions are met, then we have considered recycled content target. But of course, in considering recycled content target, we also took a final element into account, which is the full contact sensitivity. You cannot have the same level of recycled content target if your product has to be food contact sensitive, so it will be in contact with the human beings, or if it's simply non-food contact sensitive, so it's something which is like, I don't know, your detergent bottle, which indeed there is not any risk that something which will contain one day food which is destined to human consumption. So that I think is also an important element, and in there we have closely linked also with our colleagues in DG Santé, because they are also reviewing the food contact materials legislation, and there are clear interlinks between the two of them.
Perfect, thank you very much. We're coming to the end of our time. But before we wrap up, let's take a look at our poll, which again was how can packaging contribute to a more sustainable future? So we have 35% in favour by increasing both reuse and recycling. We have 24% in favour by reducing packaging waste on the market, 11% by increasing recycling, 11% by using more renewable materials, 11% by decarbonising the packaging industry, and 8% by increasing reuse. So I'd like to go back to the participants for some final remarks from each of you, and maybe a short reaction to the results of this poll. Let's start with Maria.
Well, we need a combined and update solution. We need a proposal, but it will take into account the needs of the industry and also to address the needs of the consumer. It is obvious that we need to combine reuse solutions, a recycle solution, and also to increase the deputy refining schemes and in combination with extended producer responsibility schemes. It's not easy, but we have to streamline our criteria, and we have to address our target, which is no waste of packaging by 2030.
Perfect, thank you. Carsten, your final remarks and any thoughts on the poll results?
To me, it was the most obvious answer to your question, but happy to see that reuse and recycling are not seen as alternative solutions that compete with each other, but rather as complementary, where reusable models are serving both the customer needs and environmental needs, then they should be applied and promoted. And there are lots of companies out there who are promoting new solutions, whole reuse platforms that are not applicable to a single product, but to different products or to available to different brands. And they are facing sometimes regulatory barriers, looking into hygiene, safety standards that may not always be necessary. And there are also liability issues that governments can look into to ease the scale of these solutions. But at the core, I think, is that the EU framework needs to set the right conditions to allow that these innovative solutions can scale, and that member states are accountable to create the right conditions for it. Thank you.
Saverio, final remarks and thoughts on the poll?
Well, on the poll, I think we should take more time to understand and to reflect on those answers, but it's still very interesting. And to me, it's not very different from what Carsten just said. And I think we need to reuse when it's possible. We need to continue to recycle and not to harm the planet. So I think that the recycled content is a key element in this situation, in this overall picture. And there, I'm proud to say that we are already at for new corrugated at 89% recycled content, and that the whole target is not to harm the planet for our kids, for our families, for the future. So we are all committed to improve. There is a lot to improve, and we are working hard on that, and we will continue to do so. And that's why innovation is going to play a key part for this and for CO2 emission and just to reach the Green Deal with success.
Thank you. And then let's finish with Mattia for your final words.
Yeah, so first of all, I would like to reply to the question of this, debate, which was whether the new rules on packaging will make European future more sustainable, and I strongly believe that yes, not only we will increase sustainability with the new rules, but we will also increase the independence of the European Union in terms of supply of some of the raw materials. So that is also an important factor which is often neglected and is not so clear in the debate. But indeed, if you increase the amount of plastics which is made with, for example, with secondary raw materials, you are decreasing automatically your import of oil, because indeed primary plastic is made out of virgin plastic is made out of oil. The same applies to other provisions. So the more you establish a system for reuse, or you facilitate a system for reuse, the more you rely on less imports of certain materials. So that is also an important element, particularly in the current debate. And then on the results of your poll, I can only say that it's reassuring to see that at least the top three scored, let's say, priorities are largely in what the Commission is working in terms of impact assessment and options which we are considering. So that's I think it's a very interesting evidence that indeed. And also, as a final point, I would like to invite all the relevant stakeholders to participate to a workshop that we will be having on the 30th of May. Will be really the opportunity to engage. I mean, on this file, we have been engaging a lot with industry and NGOs. Our door is always open. I mean, indeed, here there are many different stakeholders, but indeed on the 30th, our idea on the 30th of May is to really have the opportunity to discuss with all of you where we are, what are the measures under consideration, together with us, with our contractor as well. So I think it would be an opportunity to take stock and to take stakeholder feedback, which in my view is always essential, because I mean, we need to work with civil society, with the industry, and also with member states, if we want indeed to ensure that this revision will lead towards a more sustainable future.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Well, thanks everyone. Today we've touched on everything from the stimulating reuse to mandatory recycled content targets to deposit return schemes. Big thank to Carsten, Maria, Severio and Mattia for joining us today. Thank you to our online audience for watching and sending in some great questions. And thank you to our partner FEFCO for making this event possible. If you have any feedback, please send it to live@politico.eu. You can also check our website for events updates. We have a great events lineup for this year, including our Sustainable Future Week happening from November 29th to December 1st. That's goodbye from me and all of us, and have a great rest of the day.
This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.